Welcome to Hubs and Drivers, a podcast for building product marketers, sponsored by Build Marketing. I'm Jeff Donaldson, your host. On this episode, Trade Show Trade-Off, evaluating your trade show investments. Trade shows have been an important component of a building materials manufacturer's marketing strategy for many years. They represent a substantial investment of time, resources, and money. You know why? Because it's an opportunity to interact face-to-face directly with your customers and prospects. Then came a global pandemic, and that changed everything. It shut down the trade show industry across the board, not just in the building and construction industry. As we move away from the acute phase of COVID-19, now is the time for you as a building materials manufacturer to reevaluate your trade show strategy. Joining us for insight and perspective are the top two executives here at Build Marketing, our CEO, Kevin Mayer, and Dave Sladack, our president. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us.
Sure.
So, Kevin, let's start simply. As I said, there's a massive investment that's required to be successful for a building materials manufacturer when you're going to a trade show. Should they still be part of the consideration set?
Well, I think the first thing you got to look at is the out-of-pocket investment that you have to make, not only in the cost of the booth, which depending on the size of your booth can be significant, but the people that you're sending to the show, the lodging, the travel and entertainment cost. And then one of the costs that a lot of manufacturers don't realize is the amount of time it takes to coordinate the booth. Get people ready to work in the booth, get the booth to the job site, get the booth, somebody with the company to work with the company setting up the booth, making sure the booth company has produced the booth to your standards and all the areas of the booth meet your objectives for the trade show. So the investment is significant out of pocket. I think the other thing is there's a lot of misconceptions about trade shows and what the true value is that a trade show delivers. And many of those misconceptions come from the view that it's a lead generation tool. And it's not. It's a branding tool. You know, and the investment in a trade show would be similar to the investment you'd make from an advertising, content, or public relations perspective to introduce your brand, to introduce it to your audience, position it in the category, because your competitors are usually at the show, and really drive brand. It's not a lead generation tool. It's not a tool where you're scanning badges and trying to call people as soon as you get back from the trade show. Those companies that execute that way in many circumstances are annoying the people that came to the booth. They just came to learn about the brand, learn about the products, and go through their processes to meet the company, meet the people at the company, and begin learning about the products. They're not ready to buy. They're ready to learn.
And that's an interesting point that you make, Kevin, because it's in some sense a different litmus test for whether or not to attend, right? It's more about awareness, it's about brand building, it's not about driving leads, because that whole lead capture mechanism has been a staple at trade shows for many years, right, Dave?
Absolutely. Before COVID, it was very common for our clients to be spending upwards of 40 to 50% on their trade shows of their total marketing budget. That's since changed since COVID.
So how should building materials manufacturers go about assessing the value of the trade shows that they choose? You have to make sure you're making the right investment. Which shows do you pick and how do you go about doing that? You know, what criteria should they be using?
Yeah, so at Build, what we advise our clients to do is create a plan, okay? And within that plan, part of it is the budget, right? So the first thing is, look, 40% of your total budget on a trade show, as Kevin said, it's a brand building exercise. It just isn't worth that kind of money anymore, especially since folks aren't coming back to the trade shows yet like they were pre-COVID. The other thing is set a plan up, prioritize, okay? You don't have to attend every trade show. Pick one or two of the very, very important ones, and even there, every other year, maybe switch off. The other thing you can do is really have a reason to go, right? So if there's a new product launch that you're coming out with or something of great news importance, cool, make the investment, go a little heavy that year. But in most years, if it's just, okay, well, we're just there because we need to be, take a break and put your dollars elsewhere. So really, it's the idea of prioritizing and having a plan. Further than that, we recommend that our clients create journeys while they're there. Okay, so a customer journey for what you want that prospect to do when they're attending the show. So there's a pre-plan. How are we going to drive traffic to the show through some very targeted advertising? While you're at the show, look at your trade show experience and say, okay, how can we, in a measurably way, you really take somebody through our booth. There should be a beginning of the booth and the end of the booth, and have that booth experience tell a story. And there should be some digital interaction along the way too, with QR codes and other technology that can help measure who's spending time in the various parts of your trade show booth. And then afterwards, of course, follow up with that list that you have and then nurture them.
And in some cases, you can also think about, is it worthwhile, if we're going to make the investment of time, resources, and money to put people there and to do all this work to make a splash at a trade show? Is it possible that we want to think about a hospitality event off the side in some ways that might work as well? I'm sure you, as somebody that's been in the industry for so many years, you've had experience with that.
I think it gets back to what Dave noted. It's all about planning, and the planning should be aligned with your objectives. And if your objectives are to drive brand and make a statement in your category, or maybe it's a new category that's evolving now. We have a lot of new categories of building products evolving right now. The investment might be there, but it's got to be tied to your objectives. And the objectives that you have should tell you that, hey, the investment in this trade show makes sense, and here's how we're going to measure success.
Here's how we're going to go after it, right? So that evaluation has to be going on quite often when it comes to trade shows, because there are many every year. But let's say a building materials manufacturer steps back and does that reevaluation now that the paradigm has changed. What are some of the marketing tactics, Kevin, that you would recommend considering to replace trade shows?
Yeah, I think you want to look at traditional advertising tactics that drive brand, and that would be paid media, content marketing, public relations, your social platform. Taking dollars, if you feel your social media platform isn't up to standards today, take some of those dollars that you normally invest in a trade show and reallocate them towards social media. Maybe take those dollars, which Dave noted can be significant, 40% of the overall budget, and move it towards hyper-target digital programmatic media, where you can drive your brand, meet your brand objectives, and get a lot more exposure relative to impressions, how many eyes are looking at your brand, than you could at a trade show.
Dave, when you think about it, this industry sometimes is slow to change because trade shows have always been baked in some way. What would you say to building materials marketers who might be a little skittish about moving away from trade shows?
Well, like anything today with technology, you have to have a test and learn mentality, right? And so to Kevin's point, use a lot more of the traditional means. When I say traditional, all the paid and earned means to really help build your brand. Well, you can infuse some of that with some one-on-one efforts. Maybe there's a webinar that you can do or something like that. So you're using your paid dollars now to just generate in a much more targeted way some prospects that maybe you'd see at a trade show, but you're doing it more virtually and it's with a lot more targeted effect.
Interesting thoughts. Appreciate your insights, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Welcome.
There's another byproduct of the pandemic when it comes to trade shows, virtual trade shows. It's something that rose in prominence, removes that face-to-face interaction, often removes a lot of the costs, but still allows you to interact with your prospects and customers. Something to consider when it comes to your trade show strategy as you move forward as a building materials manufacturer. Hey, would you like to ask us a question or maybe even suggest a topic for another edition of our podcast? Email us. Drop us a line at info@hubsanddriverspodcast.com. Again, that's info@hubsanddriverspodcast.com. That's all for this edition of Hubs and Drivers. I'm Jeff Donaldson, your host. Hope to see you next time.